What happens when two of America's most infamous brothers, convicted of murdering their own parents in cold blood, try to walk free after more than 3 decades behind bars? For Lyle and Eric Menendez, that question was just answered, and the result was devastating. Just one day after Eric's parole request was denied, his brother Lyle faced the exact same fate. The California Parole Board slammed the door on his chance at freedom, delivering a ruling that reminded the world of one of the most brutal crimes Beverly Hills has ever seen. To understand why this case still rattles the public, you have to go back to 1989. A quiet, wealthy neighborhood, a sprawling mansion on Elm Drive, and inside, a crime scene that looked like something out of a nightmare. Lyle and Eric's parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, were gunned down in their own living room. The sheer violence shocked even seasoned investigators. Shotgun blasts tearing through the air in what prosecutors later called nothing short of an execution. And then came the call. A frantic Lyle dialing 911, his voice shaking as he claimed that strangers had broken in and killed his parents. "Someone killed my parents," he insisted. But detectives would soon uncover the truth. Those strangers never existed. The killers were sitting right inside that Beverly Hills mansion, and they were the victims' own sons. But even after their convictions, the story didn't end there, because the brothers claimed something darker drove them to murder. A family secret so disturbing it split public opinion for decades. When the Menendez brothers finally went to trial, the courtroom wasn't just a place for facts and evidence. It became a theater of emotion, trauma, and shocking accusations. From the very beginning, their defense didn't deny that they pulled the triggers. Instead, they focused on why. According to Eric and Lyle, their father, Jose, was not the successful, polished Hollywood executive the public saw on the outside. Behind closed doors, they described him as a tyrant, violent, manipulative, and abusive. They claimed years of torment, with Lyle saying the physical abuse often fell on him because he was expected to be great. But when that abuse shifted to Eric, he said it was like watching his younger brother walk into the same nightmare he had endured. Their mother, Kitty, wasn't painted as an innocent bystander either. The brothers accused her of turning a blind eye, too weak or unwilling to intervene. In their eyes, the family home wasn't a mansion, it was a prison. And when they finally killed their parents, they argued it wasn't out of greed, but out of desperation, the only way to end years of trauma. The courtroom listened, and so did the world. Millions of Americans tuned in, divided by one central question. Were Lyle and Eric victims of unbearable abuse? Or just spoiled rich kids who wanted their parents' fortune? The first trials ended in hung juries, reflecting just how polarizing the story had become. But in 1996, the brothers were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Still, that cloud of doubt, the possibility that their claims were true, has followed them for more than 30 years. And now, decades later, those very claims of abuse were at the center of their fight for parole. On Thursday morning, after 36 years behind prison walls, Lyle Menendez logged into a video link for what could have been the biggest moment of his life. A parole hearing. His chance to prove that he was no longer the young man who carried out one of the most infamous crimes in Beverly Hills history. From the start, Lyle leaned into the same defense he and his brother had carried for decades: the abuse. He told the board that his father had singled him out, focusing most of the violence on him because Jose expected greatness. Lyle explained that when the abuse shifted toward Eric, his younger brother, he felt terrified, not just for Eric's safety, but for his own place in the family. But the parole commissioners weren't interested in sympathy alone. They pressed him with tough questions, circling back again and again to one haunting moment: the 911 call. The night of the murders, Lyle's voice was shaking as he insisted strangers had broken in. "Someone killed my parents," he cried. To prosecutors, that lie was the beginning of a lifelong pattern, and to the board, it was proof of a man who had spent decades manipulating the truth. They also raised another issue: honesty in prison. Records showed Lyle had not always been transparent about his conduct, with several disciplinary write-ups tied to contraband. If he had truly changed, why did his behavior still raise red flags? For every explanation Lyle gave, the board pushed harder. The longer the questioning dragged on, the clearer it became. His story wasn't convincing them. And when the ruling finally came, it was brutal. Just one day after Eric's hopes were crushed, Lyle was told he too would remain behind bars. But while Lyle's words fell short, his brother's testimony, released publicly for the first time, painted an even darker picture. If Lyle's parole hearing felt tense, Eric's was nothing short of haunting. For the first time, the public got to hear the audio of his testimony, his own voice after more than 3 decades in prison, describing what life inside the Menendez home was really like. Eric didn't start with excuses. Instead, he painted a picture of silence, a family where loyalty meant secrecy. The loyalty in my family was secrecy. Loyalty was keep the family secret, he said. In his words, protecting appearances came before protecting the children, and it left him and his brother trapped in an endless cycle of fear. But as emotional as those words were, the parole board wasn't swayed. They came armed with a list of Eric's misconduct over the years, each point hitting like a hammer. They reminded him of his violence behind bars, of manipulation, of his involvement in criminal schemes even while incarcerated. They called out substance abuse, and perhaps most damaging of all, they brought up the brothers' repeated use of illegal cell phones, contraband that showed in their eyes that Eric had not truly reformed. When confronted, Eric didn't fight it. He admitted the misconduct. Fair enough, he said. Absolutely true. But the honesty came too late. To the commissioners, it was proof that even decades later, Eric's actions had failed to match his words. And so, just like his brother, his chance at freedom was stripped away in an instant. The board's message was clear: remorse wasn't enough. But Eric and Lyle's behavior inside prison wasn't the only reason they were denied. The record showed a troubling pattern of choices, and those choices made the board believe that freedom would be far too dangerous. When the Menendez brothers were sentenced to life without parole back in 1996, many assumed they'd disappear into the prison system, their story ending behind concrete walls and razor wire. But that wasn't the case. Over the years, both Eric and Lyle continued making headlines. Not for redemption, but for misconduct. At first, it was the usual problems that come with prison life: fights, disciplinary actions, and adapting to a world where every move is monitored. But then came the issue that parole commissioners couldn't ignore: contraband. Time and again, the brothers were caught using illegal cell phones. These weren't minor slip-ups. They were deliberate attempts to communicate, manipulate, and operate in ways inmates simply aren't allowed. For the parole board, this painted a clear picture. It wasn't just about what the brothers did in 1989. It was about whether they could be trusted now. And the evidence didn't look good. Instead of modeling rehabilitation, their records showed patterns of manipulation, broken rules, and a refusal to follow the structure that parole itself requires. Beyond the phones, there were other marks on their records: incidents of violence, allegations of criminal behavior while inside, and substance abuse. In short, a track record that didn't exactly scream ready for release. What made it worse was how some supporters of the brothers still saw them as model prisoners, men who had turned their lives around. To the board, that disconnect was disturbing. If even their advocates believed they were better behaved than they really were, it meant Lyle and Eric were still skilled at shaping narratives in their favor. And that skill, the ability to manipulate, was exactly what kept them dangerous. For the commissioners, this wasn't just about the past. It was about the present. And in the present, the Menendez brothers hadn't proven they could live freely without bending the rules. After hours of questioning, recounting, and justification, the room grew heavy with anticipation. For Lyle and Eric Menendez, this was the moment that could define the rest of their lives. But when the board delivered its decision, there was no hesitation, no softening of the blow. The answer was simple: denied. The commissioners laid out their reasoning with precision, almost like prosecutors summing up a case. They pointed back to the savagery of the original murders, calling them calculated and merciless. They highlighted the lies told in the immediate aftermath, especially that infamous 911 call where Lyle's voice shook as he insisted intruders had gunned down his parents. They reviewed Eric's record of misconduct, the fights, the criminal activity, the smuggling of phones. And then they delivered the line that cut deepest: "You have not been a model prisoner, and the fact that some people believe you have is disturbing." It was a reminder that parole isn't about winning sympathy. It's about proving rehabilitation. And in the eyes of the board, neither brother had come close. For Eric, it meant his emotional testimony about secrecy and abuse wasn't enough. For Lyle, it meant his insistence on being more honest today than he was in 1989 didn't matter. The parole commissioners saw through it all, and their verdict was unanimous. The ruling left the brothers stunned, but not surprised. After 36 years in prison, both men knew this was always going to be an uphill battle. Still, hearing the words spoken aloud, that they would remain behind bars, was a devastating reality check. And so, just like that, the Menendez brothers' marathon fight for freedom hit another wall. But in their world, even a wall isn't the end of the road. The news of the parole denial spread quickly, but the Menendez family wasted no time issuing a response. In a statement released overnight, they admitted the setback stung, but they framed it as just another mile in a very long race. While we are, of course, disappointed, we are not discouraged. This is a marathon, not a sprint. That single line captured the mood perfectly. For decades, the Menendez brothers' case has been less about sudden victories and more about grueling uphill battles. And this moment was no different. According to their legal team, the brothers are already preparing to appeal the board's decision. Appeals, however, can be slow and uncertain. If that fails, their next chance at parole won't come for another 3 years. But beyond parole, their lawyers are also pushing for something even more ambitious, a brand new trial. They believe fresh evidence, changing public sentiment, and renewed scrutiny over the brothers' claims of abuse could open the door to revisiting the entire case. For supporters of Lyle and Eric, this ruling doesn't mark the end. It marks a new chapter. They point to shifting cultural awareness around abuse and trauma, arguing that the brothers' defense may be understood differently in today's world than it was in the 1990s. To them, the marathon is still very much alive. But for critics, the parole denial is exactly what justice demands. They see the appeals as little more than another manipulation, another attempt to rewrite history and escape responsibility for a crime that was as calculated as it was brutal. And so, as the Menendez brothers return to their cells, one thing is certain: their story is far from over. More than 3 decades after the murders on Elm Drive, the Menendez brothers' story still refuses to fade. It resurfaces in headlines, in documentaries, in debates on social media, and now in the stark ruling of a parole board unwilling to let them walk free. To many, the decision makes perfect sense. The crime was too savage, the lies too bold, and the prison records too troubling. Lyle and Eric, they argue, chose greed over gratitude and have spent years proving they still bend rules whenever they can. In this view, keeping them locked away isn't just justice, it's protection. But for others, the story cuts deeper. They see 2 young men trapped in a gilded cage, enduring abuse no one should have to face, and finally snapping in the most extreme way possible. To them, the brothers are both killers and victims, punished not only for what they did, but for daring to expose the dark secret of their family. That tension between justice and trauma, between punishment and mercy, is why the Menendez case still divides America. Every parole hearing, every new documentary, every appeal reopens the same question: do these men deserve a second chance at freedom, or have they already written their fate in blood? For now, the answer is clear. The doors of the prison remain shut. The marathon their family speaks of continues, with appeals, new trial efforts, and another parole chance waiting years down the road. But the bigger question isn't just about the Menendez brothers, it's about us, about how we weigh abuse, accountability, and forgiveness. And as long as that debate continues, the story of Eric and Lyle will never truly be over.